Well, you say that a variety of tactics, of which that's one. Can you can we just go to the tactic of industrial action? Um, you're going to take industrial action in next month over pensions, and the NUT has participated in industrial action over pensions, and I think the TUC is looking at another day of industrial action in October on this subject. Because one of the contrasts between the UK and unions in Europe is that in Europe, particularly in Spain and Italy, France, Greece, industrial action, general strikes, demonstrations and so on have been held over austerity measures as a whole, rather than being restricted to one specific aspect, which is no doubt of great concern to trade unions, but some other aspects as well: break up of collective bargaining, diminution in wages, job insecurity, and wider than that, cuts to welfare benefits, tax on education, and so forth and so on. And one of the reasons I've always thought that industrial action in this phase has been restricted to pensions, partly, of course, that it's common to many unions, but partly is a reflection of the state of our industrial action law, which says you can only have a legitimate trade dispute, you can only take lawful industrial action in furtherance of a legitimate trade dispute, and that's essentially restricted to terms and conditions of employment. Keith Ewing and I have written a booklet for the Institute, which is available outside. Give it a little puff, this yellow booklet, in which we suggest that it might, under European convention law, it might be possible to organise a protest strike against a much wider range of government policies, if that was the will of the members. I wonder what appetite there might be in the trade union movement to take industrial action on a wider front than simply pensions.
Well, the extant ballot that PCS have is actually on wider than pensions anyway, isn't it? And I know that colleagues in Unite are thinking about moving to ballot on a much wider basis, and certainly we are in the NUT thinking about balloting on a much wider basis. I think the interesting part is what you say about protest, because clearly there will be an activity that the TUC will organise in the autumn, and it will be a protest, but it will also be about attempting to say, it'll be under the banner of a future that works, saying this is what's wrong and this is what it might look like. And it will be a protest, but one of the things that goes down very badly with my members is if you talk about protest action, they say, yes, but we don't want to protest, we want to win. So there's an issue there about how you make sure that you use industrial action judiciously on the basis that it needs to be part of a strategy where you actually think that there are some objectives that you might achieve. So it's absolutely legitimate and fair and reasonable that there should be protests. I think there probably should be more protests. We saw really good stuff from the NUS, but also from younger people protesting at the loss of EMA. We did see a lot of people on the street, and we saw spontaneous protests, and I think that's to be encouraged, that people actually get onto the street and do those kinds of things. But just having a protest, however much it would be helpful to be able to see the European legislation in that context, I think is not the only thing that my members are interested in. They're also interested in, how much of this do we need to do so that we can begin to win something. And one of the reasons why we're considering balloting on wider than just pensions is because over a period of time, teaching has become an almost unmanageable job. I mean, everybody works hard. I know they do. But, when I started teaching, I actually had a weekend. I didn't take work home, but I am talking about 30 odd years ago. Now, my young members, if they have Sunday afternoon off, they think they're doing something wrong. So there is a real need for us to organise both industrial action and other types of campaigning to win back teaching. Now, nobody should be working to 68 anyway, and we, PCS ourselves, Unite, and other unions want to come into this, are running a big public-facing campaign saying 68 is too late, and we think it is. But the idea that any teacher could work until 68 under the current framework is just unbelievable. And I wouldn't want to be carried down the stairs by a 68-year-old paramedic, or rely on all of the other public service workers who will be potentially working till 68 to carry out their role. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that protest action absolutely has a place, but we have to make sure that we've also got an industrial action strategy that involves us believing that there are things that we can win out of that.
No.
Well, I think the answer to your question and what you raised in the pamphlet is yes. We clearly do need to try to move to utilise essentially what is broad strike action on a generalised basis against what are political decisions. And if anybody wants any encouragement that sometimes this is healthy, I think the fact there's been 15 general strikes in Greece and now we have the equivalent of the far left being asked to form a government is interesting, to put it mildly. The fact that in France people had demonstrations on the streets when the pension wage went from 60 to 62, and now the president Hollande has just been elected saying he wants to cut the pension age from 62 to 60 when ours is going up to the 70s. Yeah. 68 announced, but in reality they're already saying it'll be 71 for graduates and 75 if you're born today. So there is no question in my mind that laws that restrict us or attempt to restrict us to solely narrowly focused industrial disputes are about weakening us. I think is back to a bit like the last answer in this sense, which is I think your tactics should be dictated by the situation that you face. And in that sense, if you've got a dispute with a single employer around issues that affect particular members, so for example the tanker drivers issue that we saw in Unite, then clearly it would appear to me the tactics therefore should be determined by what the tanker drivers and their stewards say and how you can hit the companies. And that would lead you to a certain conclusion. If on the other hand you're dealing with public sector pension policy, and it's absolutely been crystal clear to me all along, no one union can win on a question of public sector pensions. And the idea there's a sectoral solution to the question of public sector pensions, I think is just wrong, because the government in all of its approach said they wouldn't even negotiate the three big things of work longer, pay more, get less. So we had a year of absolutely farcical discussions, which I went to, and none of them addressed the core issues. We talked about the stuff in the periphery. Now, to my mind, therefore, the answer to that has to be coordinated, generalised action that can build enough pressure to force a political change of mind. And that's because that is what you're facing. And so the tactic you require, that doesn't mean all strikes have to be political. You can have small ones with employers on a specific issue, but on the big issues, I think it does. And in that sense, two things I think emerge for me from that. One is that I think it's healthy that in unions at the moment, there is a real debate going on amongst activists and stewards about industrial tactics, the role of selective action, role in action, and generalised action, which I think is a really good thing. But the other side of the coin, and this won't find favour with all, but I'll say it, is that if people, the truth is, at the TUC around the turn of the year, we had some of the most bruising, difficult debates we've ever had, and it got pretty intense. And my own view is debate is healthy, and it's a good thing that people can be upfront about saying where they disagree. And to my mind, when history is written about the period we're in, I think we will conclude that the 30th of November and 29 unions and 2 million people striking was the high water mark of trade unionism in the recent past. And what happened 3 weeks later, when we went from that, showing a glimpse of our power and the ability to put pressure on the government, to essentially most unions taking a step back, represents for me one of the lowest points in recent history in the trade union movement. And ultimately I wrote an article at the time in the Morning Star, which became controversial, but I think is worthy of discussion. Is my own analysis of that is there is ingrained in our movement a deep-seated fatalism amongst some that actually tells you can't actually ever win. You can't win when the state and the government is against you, so to coin the phrase, it's only can ever be damage limitation. And I think some people were frightened by the 30th of November on our side, whereas personally I found it entirely liberating, and I thought the potential, if we'd called another strike like that in January, I think we'd have had the government right on the back foot. Because what happened after the 30th was the government took a calculated risk. And they called us all in and they said to us, you will sign the deal that you've opposed within 48 hours, or we will take it off the table and we'll impose something worse. Now, Len McCluskey said at the TUC when he was asked about this, that is classic bullying, and the answer has to be, on every occasion, you tell them to get stuffed. And the problem is that people didn't tell them to get stuffed. People were frightened into thinking, God, it could get worse. Now, to my mind, the government banked on division in the movement, which is what they got. And then Maud was able to get up in Parliament 22nd of December and claim falsely there's only one union in Britain who wouldn't accept it. There's these loony lefties in the PCS. I mean, lo and behold, last week we find that actually unions representing a majority of trade unionists in health, education and the civil service, none of them have agreed. And so we are the majority, not the minority, not all on strike, but none of them have agreed the proposals. And I think that is the debate, John, that we should have, because it strikes me that if people's experiences, you take them up the hill, and we have a lot of rhetoric and we really show people a glimpse of their power, only to find within weeks, we are essentially telling them that what was previously not acceptable is the best they're going to get. I can't see how it will have any other effect than demoralise large swathes of our movement. Now, for me, that doesn't mean we can always call all-out strikes and everybody wants to strike all the time, but it does mean, I think, that we deserve better than the hurried so-called debate that we had. And if the truth be told, well, I think March the 28th in London, when the teachers and lecturers went on strike, and May the 10th last week, when we went on strike with Uniting Health and the UCU and NIPSA and the RMT. Let's not forget the POA who took illegal strike action last week and really shook things up, as I know you're well aware of.
The
protest, yeah, okay. I'll go with that, but it looked like a strike and smelled like a strike to me. But anyway, I think that the point is what this represents, if we're really frank, is trying to get this show back on the road. It represents an attempt of those unions to remobilise people. And to my mind, this debate was talked about trade unions in a time of austerity. And to me, the biggest single thing that is obvious is the idea that your normal bargaining, negotiating, leverage with individual public sector employers can get you very far at the moment, I think is misplaced. Because we're actually dealing with political decisions that the government is stating its entire economic policy on driving through austerity. And I think, therefore, we've got to be upfront about that. And I always saw, therefore, the pension strike as, to be honest, the classic definition of a political strike. It was political because the decisions we challenged were political, and that we knew the strength on our side was not having 1,000 workers out and paying them for a month. It was actually on having millions saying to people in Britain, we say no. And I think that is, to me, the debate that we really need to have. I think what's tragic is that essentially we're having that debate from being in the retreat. And that's why I think those unions and those members who have still been prepared to try and reignite it really do deserve immense credit, the members of these unions who are striking in very difficult circumstances when actually they've been attacked not just by Tory politicians, but disgracefully also by Labour politicians who should have had the gumption to try and support this resistance rather than run away like we were embarrassing relatives.